I'm Clarissa Mangarin.
And I'm Matthew Mangarin.
And this is our God Story. Hey guys, we want to share our story with you because, like many of you, we used to live in fear. We lived in fear of sharing our struggles with people because we were afraid of what they would think. We lived in fear of failure if we didn't work hard enough. So we're here to share with you guys how being vulnerable and transparent with God and with other people has totally changed our life and our marriage forever. And you know, putting your stuff out there, it's scary. We are afraid of people rejecting us or judging us when they hear what's gone on in our relationship, but we're more afraid of missing out on the good that God can do through our story. So here we go. As a child, for some reason my grandfather decided he didn't really want anything to do with me. My stepdad, although he was physically there for most of my childhood, he never really talked to me or tried to relate to me in any way. And at the time, I didn't really see it as a big deal. I didn't think it really affected me, but I didn't really honestly find out or realize that the depth of those wounds until really recently. The women in my life, however, my mom, my grandma, my aunts, and my cousins, I mean, they were so awesome. I have so many great childhood memories. Unfortunately, there was this missing piece, and that was the love of a father. Like a lot of young girls, when I got into high school and suddenly got attention from boys, it became really intoxicating for me. It became sort of a game, and it wasn't long before I started getting into drugs, into really heavy drinking, and you know, like getting attention from guys, partying was a lot of fun, and it felt really good, and I really felt like I needed that to be happy. But unfortunately, all it really did was bring me shame and guilt, and so I kept that side of me hidden from most of my family, most of my friends, because I didn't want them to think less of me.
I grew up in a loving family. My parents, they grew up in the Philippines, and they worked really hard to get to where they are today. And because of that, there was a lot of pressure on me and my brother to excel in school in order for us to have you know, this awesome career as adults. And so as a kid, I remember bringing good grades or awards or other achievements back home in order to make my parents happy. And in high school, I worked really hard to be a varsity athlete by my sophomore year and be the #1 cadet in Navy Junior ROTC and graduate at the top of my class. Their intentions were good, and as a result, I was able to apply to the Naval Academy and get accepted within months of even saying that I was interested. And as beneficial as it was for my parents to really push me and my brother, I feel like that ended up making me measure my value and worth based on my performance and what other people thought of me and their evaluation of my work. So unfortunately, that continued well into my naval career.
Matthew and I met the summer before our senior year of high school, and we fell in love very quickly. And it was full of drama. I mean, oh, it was, yeah, that was fun.
Drama.
A lot of drama. Basically, Matthew became like another addiction for me. My whole identity and source of happiness was like all wrapped up in Matthew. And if I think about it to this day, I think Matthew is the only person, or the only man, I'm sorry, that has ever told me he loves me. So when he left for college, I completely spiraled. My source of identity and happiness, like I said, was gone now. And when school started, I was very self-destructive. I sought out that high and anything that would numb out the pain that I felt because of the loneliness with Matthew gone. So I was drunk or high almost every day of the week, and I went out looking for attention from guys again because it felt good and it was something to not feel sad. And eventually that led to me being unfaithful to Matthew. And there was one night I was literally crawling to my dorm room, completely wasted, and it hit me in that moment. And I asked myself, like, what are you doing? You have this great guy who loves you. My mom was working really hard to put you through school, and what are you doing with your life? You're wasting it. So it was in that moment that I decided to change schools. I stopped partying, I stopped drinking, I stopped doing drugs. I changed, went to a different school. I focused on my work, I focused on school, I focused on spending time with my family, and I focused on getting our relationship back on track if I could. And even though I completely changed my life and completely changed all that self-destructive behavior, it still left me with shame and guilt because of all the things that I had done, and I felt completely unworthy of any kind of happiness or anything good in my life. And again, I never told people or anyone what was going on that year because I was afraid of people being upset with me, and honestly I was afraid of people hating me because of what I had done. And although I did change all those things, it was like basically putting a band-aid over a bullet wound, because I never dealt with what was at the root cause of that self-destructive behavior in the first place.
While at the Naval Academy, I continued to work hard in order to make my parents proud. And I admit it was a challenge because a lot of my classmates also did well in high school. And on top of that, we were dealing with a long-distance relationship and the emotional roller coaster that we were riding. I had no clue what Clarissa was struggling with back at home, and instead I figured that once we're together, that everything would just be back to normal, like the way it was in high school or our senior year when we first met. Despite all that, I still was able to graduate with honors, and I got my first choice as a naval aviator.
Fast forward, Matthew and I got married, we both graduated college, and at this point now I'm pregnant with our first baby. And we were living in Florida at the time, and I just felt so desperate not to mess it up. I wanted so badly to be a good wife and to be a good mother, but the problem was I had no idea how to make that happen. And I felt like a failure. I felt like a fraud, and I felt really hopeless because of the shame and the guilt that still weighed so heavily on my heart from the past. And honestly, I believed that it was just a matter of time before I messed it all up again.
While Clarissa was worried about being a good mother and wife, I was gripped in fear of not being able to provide for my new family. Even though I had a relatively high-paying job and a career that I essentially worked my whole life for. And you gotta understand, we didn't have any debt, we only had one kid, and we lived pretty frugally. Mm-hmm. But still, I was overcome by this fear of not having enough money that eventually it became a strain in our marriage.
Our friends and neighbors at the time in Florida were Christians, and I watched their relationship and the respect that they had for one another and the way that they prayed over each other, and just how they talked about their faith so freely and naturally. I couldn't help but wonder, what was underneath it all. So I started asking like a million questions, and they never tried to push their faith on us. They just simply answered my questions. I had no idea that you could have such an intimate relationship with God, and the effect that I saw that it had on their marriage, I was sold. I was like, yes, please give me some of that. So I was like, okay, how do I make this happen? I want what you guys have. And they simply told me, you just ask God into your heart and believe that Jesus is your Savior. And I was like, that's it? Done. Yes, I want that. Okay, Lord, yeah, let's do this. Let's make this happen. There was one night I was in bed and Matthew was like completely knocked out, like a deep sleep. And I felt this filling up sensation that I can't even describe in words. But I like shook Matthew awake. I was like, I've been saved. He had no idea what I was talking about, but I was just super excited. And when I shared with my friends what had happened, they were, I think, even more excited than I was, because they, I believe, had a better understanding of what had just happened. At the time, I still didn't know anything at all really of what it meant to be a Christian. I still hadn't read the Bible. I believed that, okay, now I'm saved, right? So my whole life is just gonna change overnight. My attitude is gonna change, and you know, all those hurts in my childhood would just be like dealt with just right then and there. But what I didn't realize was that was really just the beginning. I had a long road ahead of me.
In Florida, we were going to church every Sunday. Unfortunately, we just weren't connecting with the church. It was more of just a check in the box, you know, to start our week, or to say yes when my mom asks.
Did you go to church?
Yes, Mom. So it was nice having our friends around who were positive examples and just willing to share God's love with us in a deeper way. I remember one night I had an anxiety attack because of my fear of money and my fear of not being able to provide for my family. I was lying in bed and crying and explaining to Clarissa how, you know, I'm afraid of all this. And I felt so much weight. I couldn't move in my own bed. And so she prayed over me, and I felt that weight just get lifted off of me. And finally I felt at peace.
And you know, if I hadn't just recently accepted Christ and started learning about faith and learning really about prayer, I wouldn't have even known to pray in that situation. Honestly, I was just like really taken aback by his level of fear. So that was definitely God's hand in that situation. Well, we ended up moving from Florida to San Diego for Matthew's rag training, whatever, for the rag, which also meant moving away from our friends, who at that point I had become very dependent on for my faith. But at that point I was pregnant with my second child, and so I didn't really honestly pay too much attention to the fact that I was no longer seeking my faith. And then once Matthew was done, after like 9 months or so of being in San Diego, we were stationed up in Guam. A couple months after we had arrived, Matthew left for his first deployment. And I was told prior to getting to Guam that the spouses there were this amazing support system and that they would be there for you. And the truth was that I faced gossip from people who knew absolutely nothing about me, and then isolation. Unbeknownst to me, I had Jesus at my fingertips. He could have been my source of comfort and my source of peace at the time, but I just didn't know that. And so I went and turned to drinking as a way of dealing with the loneliness and the stress of him being gone. I would, you know, drink at night after getting the kids to bed, and one glass turned to 2 or more, and then eventually it was very clear to me that I was starting to have a problem. I at least did the responsible thing of realizing that, okay, something needed to change. So I told Matthew, look, I need to go home. I don't think I'm handling your deployment very well. I really do need some help. So I did. I packed the 2 kids up and we went home, and the intention really was to go home and get help so that I, you know, wouldn't get worse. But in reality, when I got to Chicago, it just placed me right back into old patterns of coping with all the hard stuff. And I went right back to drinking, I went right back to drugs, and I went again looking for that high to just numb out, because I felt such despair with Matthew gone. And so yeah, I went out looking for attention again from guys, because that's what I knew, and I was unfaithful again. And it felt a million times worse, because I'm a wife, I'm a mom, and now I believe in Jesus, so I'm like even worse of a person. And I was failing. That's what I really believed. I'm failing. And you know, who does that? He's out there fighting for our country, handling business at his end, and I'm failing to stay strong and handle business at home. I ended up just giving up on our marriage. I really gave up on myself and really just felt like trash. So I prepared myself, I think, emotionally for a divorce. I really believed that when Matthew came home from deployment, we would just end it. And I don't know, I think at the time I thought that was easier to just walk away from the marriage than to face being a failure.
Like Clarissa said, I deployed shortly after moving all of us to Guam. Our youngest daughter wasn't even 5 months, and I was going to miss the rest of her first year of life. The long distance, Clarissa and I, we dealt with that in college, but as far as me and the kids, this was going to be the first time. And Clarissa never told me the extent of her struggles, but even the smallest issue that would come up would just have me feeling so helpless, being miles apart. And so I prayed, I joined a Bible study, and it was helpful being around, the positive people. But unfortunately, when we went to the different ports, I ended up going to the bars and drinking with my friends in order to cope, in order to deal with the distance. But then we would go underway again, and I would be back in my daily devotional. I would be back with the group in the Bible study, and so my relationship with God was lukewarm. Essentially, I went to Him when I needed something. I never really praised Him for the good things that He gave me, the qualifications during my deployment and any of that really. And so the deployment ended, I returned, and things weren't perfect at home, but again, I figured that as long as we were together physically, that everything would be okay. Unfortunately, both of us, we were both going to the bars with our friends on every Friday, Saturday night, and we were drinking, but we were together, so we figured everything was okay, right? Within a blink of an eye, I was sent out on my second deployment, this time to Iraq. And again, I turned to God because I needed something. I prayed for His protection while I was gone.
At that time, I never told anybody what I was struggling with. And it is the biggest regret of my life, that time in my life and the choices that I made. But fear had such a strong grip on me that it held me captive in isolation and fear of what other people would think about me. So instead of reaching out and getting help, I just kept it to myself. When Matthew returned, we actually ended up working things out, and he ended up leaving for his second deployment. So I faced another 7.5 months with that one of being alone again. I was just so desperate for God to change me. I ended up joining a Bible study. In one of the Bible studies, I just cried my eyes out to the group and told them how God kept me alone and He wasn't sending me a friend to show me how to be a Christian. And one of the ladies in the group pulled me aside afterwards, and she's like, "Honey, you cannot have your faith be dependent on somebody else. You need to take responsibility and take hold of your own faith and have that relationship be between you and God. But not only that, you do need to join a church. We were never meant to walk this life out alone." And when she mentioned going to church, growing up in a Catholic church was one thing, but I associated Christian church with people who had never messed up, who'd never done anything wrong, these people who were like all goody two-shoes and high and mighty. So when she told me I had to go to church, I was like, no thanks. So I could be around a bunch of judgmental people who have not lived my life. But because I was so desperate to change, I was willing to try it, and I did. So while Matthew was gone, I joined a Christian church for the first time. God started revealing Himself to me, and He told me that in order for me to really change, really change, I needed to surrender my life to Him. And I couldn't keep partying and doing the things that I was doing and keep falling back on old coping patterns. But I had to completely give my life over to Him. I didn't know what that really meant at the time, and it was terrifying to hear that, but I was willing. And one of the first areas that God really worked on my heart was the area of forgiveness. And he told me that not only did I need to ask him for forgiveness, but that I needed to receive the forgiveness he was giving me. I had no idea how vital it was for me to start there. For my faith to really change, it did need to start with embracing God's forgiveness, and it was a starting point for change.
My second deployment was in Iraq, and I remember there was one morning where I was getting off a night shift and I went back to where our rooms were, away from the hangar. The rest of my unit there were back in the hangar. All of a sudden I hear the alarm go off for a mortar attack, and I could hear explosions in the background, and so I jump out of my bed and I try to get under it, and I'm face down, you know, with my hands behind my head, and I'm thinking to myself, this can't be it. I'm all alone here. Everyone else is in the hangar, and you know, will they know to come back for me? Will my letters for my kids that I wrote, will that still, you know, be okay? And so I prayed to God that He would protect me, that He would make the stop, that I'd be able to again go home safely to my family. And I hear our defense gun shooting out multiple bullets, and all of a sudden I hear shrapnel hit the top of our roof, and then silence. We get the all clear signal, and at this point this was eye-opening for a lot of us, especially some of the guys in the hangar who saw, you know, the mortars land right in front of them near the helicopters. Finally, at the end of this deployment, we get home, and you know, I have a positive outlook on life. I'm happy to be home and happy to see Clarissa going to this Bible study and going to church, and I had to join her. I had to be a part of that. And the church we went to, it was different. It was different from what we're used to, but I was just happy that we were being consistent with going to church and with meeting with, you know, other believers. Fast forward a few months later, it's getting close to my rotation. At this point, putting my preference for our next duty station. And I worked hard, you know, the last 2.5 years, making sure I'm getting qualified, making sure I'm, you know, building those relationships with my sailors and being able to lead them. And I wanted to continue down what we call the golden path. In my preference sheet, I put all the sought-after jobs, all the training jobs, and it was in either San Diego, Norfolk, or Pensacola. And I remember getting a call from my commanding officer, and I was anxious, just wondering, you know, what location was it going to be. As soon as I heard his voice, though, it sounded like something was off. I didn't get any of the duty stations that I requested, and I was devastated. I just couldn't understand how I didn't, you know, get what I wanted. You know, I told myself that it was going to be okay. I told myself that we'd be able to move on, but I was having a hard time believing it. It wasn't until the second list came out and we sat down with one of my mentors and we looked at it, and a lot of the locations and the names and the jobs just wasn't really exciting me. And then he pointed at Whidbey Island Search and Rescue. Clarissa and I, we felt something about that. And we felt that God was telling us that this is going to be, you know, my next duty station. This was going to be part of His path. And
we'd never even heard of it.
Yeah, didn't know Whidbey Island, didn't know anything about Washington other than the rain. But we went ahead and trusted the feeling that we got, the presence of God there, and I put in my request and I got it. Again, we had no idea what type of blessing that was going to be to us and how much our lives were going to change because of the people that we meet there. And yeah, we were just excited about moving forward from everything back in Guam.
Yeah. Yeah, like Matthew said, we had no idea what a blessing Washington would be for us. I mean, we were so ready to move on from Guam. When we did move over to Whidbey, we both understood at that point that we needed to make some radical changes in our life. We found this really cute church and we got involved in like every way possible. We started teaching in children's ministry. Actually, after our third child was born, I worked at our church for the children's ministry. under a super awesome boss. Love you, Leslie. We did, basically whatever the church offered, we were there. It really became our family. We learned as much about the Bible as we could. We learned what a godly marriage was supposed to be about, and we learned how to be godly parents and what that was supposed to look like. Yeah, I think for the first time ever, I really felt whole and grounded and peace, a peace I had never experienced before in my life. Before, I used to be so afraid of being judged and rejected by Christians, and now some of my closest friends and biggest encouragers are those Christian friends I made in Whitby. Yeah, Nina was very right when she told me we were never meant to live this Christian life out alone. We are supposed to be in relationship because that's how our God is. He's very relational. Man, I just learned that so much firsthand from these relationships that we made out there that I think really changed our life forever. And I don't know what we would have done as a couple had we not had the support and encouragement from our friends. Yeah, I learned how to pray and the power of prayer, and very specifically I learned the power of praying out loud, whether it was over myself or my husband or my kids or friends. I never would have known that before, and seen the blessings that come with that. I always say that God has his work cut out with him, or cut out for him with me, because I'm a hot mess. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. In those 4 short years, God changed our life in so many ways. It's unbelievable. And it all happened and started on this teeny little island 2 hours north of Seattle, a place we had never heard of and had no idea would be this incredible blessing to our family.
Looking back, not getting what I wanted out of Guam and end up going to Whidbey Island was exactly what we needed. It was part of God's plan for us, and like Clarissa said, we surrounded ourselves with godly friends just across the street from us, and we went to an awesome church and we were consistent there. And on Friday nights in Guam we would be out in the bars with our friends, but Friday at Whidbey Island I would be at church with other men learning about God's grace. And from that grace class, one of the verses that really stood out to me was from Matthew 5:16. It says, "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." And what I got from that is that I want to continue to be a positive influence, but really I want to be a light in this dark world. And I still want to continue to do certain things and accomplish certain tasks and obtain different achievements, not to show off or not to receive praise from other people, but more to praise and honor God. Working at Whidbey Island, I had the opportunity to do just that, and I worked with an awesome team with the search and rescue unit. My last deployment in my Navy career was on an aircraft carrier, and this time Clarissa was pregnant with our 4th kid. I got 3 kids at home. Yeah, I knew it was going to be a struggle. However, I already had a consistent relationship with God, and I was going to use that time away to draw closer to him and learn about what more he has for me as a man, as a leader of the household. And on the ship, I was in the Word every day. I enjoyed our worship team, and I would play with them, practice every week and play every Sunday, and it was great. During that time, I was also preparing for my transition into the civilian sector. I was working on my resume, setting up interviews while in port, and as I mentioned, I had a fear of not being able to provide for my family. And so there I was, less than half a year away from receiving my last paycheck from the Navy, and I had nothing lined up. I was at peace, and the reason why is because I learned that God is the ultimate provider. And I admit there were some ups and downs within the interview process. I wouldn't get a phone call back, I'd get turned down, but I knew that that was God closing the doors and not rejection. Fast forward to end of deployment, we're in Whidbey Island, we're packing up the van, it's our last day, and we're setting up for a road trip down the Pacific coast, going to San Diego, then Texas, then Chicago. And this is something that we've never been able to do, something I wasn't able to provide for my family because of the limitations and having to get to certain places on time. And I wanted to make sure that we enjoyed this, and again, nothing lined up, but we had such a great time. We ended up making it down to San Diego to visit my brother. Again, the plan was to go to Texas to go to a job conference from there, but when we got to San Diego, my brother was on a last-minute underway period, and so we decided to wait for him. We took the kids to Disneyland, and then went back to San Diego, spent time with my brother, and then decided, you know, I could just skip that conference in Texas, go to one in San Diego. It's a little bit smaller, but we'll just see how it goes. It turns out that's where I got my current job, and actually within a year of getting hired, I got promoted. It's so amazing, that whole transition, and relying on God and knowing that He is, again, the ultimate provider. You know, He has a plan for us. It's so great. You know, God is indeed good.
The summer of 2017, I went to a women's retreat, and I felt God stirring in my heart in a way I'd never experienced before, and I felt like He was telling me something big was about to happen, but I didn't know at the time what it was. But soon after, I felt Him prompting me to confess to Matthew what had gone on in our marriage and the struggles I had with addiction that I had already overcome, but he was completely unaware of. I was terrified. I really believed this was it. He's gonna leave me. He's gonna take the kids. I'll probably never see them again. I never even saw Matthew forgiving me as a possibility. But I was just at the point in my faith walk where I wanted God so desperately, and I wanted to be obedient to Him, that I was willing to step out in faith in this huge way. I did tell my sister-in-law what was going on. I had to tell her because I thought I was going to be homeless that night. I thought he was going to kick me out and I would need a place to stay, and that was really the only reason I said anything to her. Just before telling Matthew, I cried to God, and I was able to say, God, your will be done, not mine. I don't know about you, but to be in a place where you can say that and really mean it is a true testament to the change that God had done in my heart for me to be able to obey that way. Although I was terrified, I was happy to obey God in this. When I told Matthew, the first words out of his mouth, despite his heartbreak, were, I forgive you and I'll never leave you. And although it was going to take time for healing and restoration to happen in our marriage, I fully believe that I witnessed a miracle in that moment when Matthew chose to forgive me. And honestly, it wasn't even a possibility in my mind for that to happen. I only saw the end of our marriage. Man, if anything solidified my faith, it was seeing God's grace through Matthew and His ability to forgive me and to show me mercy when I didn't deserve it at all. We both talked about how, had this been 5 years ago, it would have been a very different outcome. But it was a testament to what God has been doing in both of us over the last 5 years, especially during that time, and would be. You know, for the first time, our marriage is really strong. It's the strongest it's ever been. It's unshakable, you know, at this time, and really it's because Christ is at the center of our marriage. And He's in the center of all of our decisions. He's at the center of the way that we relate to people and relate to one another. You know, I never really believed that Matthew loved me. I always told myself, you know, it's just a matter of time before he leaves you. And for the first time, I feel truly and wholly loved, not only by God because of everything He has shown me and taught me and done for me, but because of now the way that Matthew was able to show me love and move forward in our relationship and to not hold all those terrible things against me. And I don't deserve an ounce of the goodness that I've experienced through Christ and through Matthew. But you know, our God doesn't give based on what we deserve. He gives based on His goodness. And I'm so, so thankful for everything that God has done. And I'm so thankful and grateful for the man that He's blessed me with.
I'm not gonna lie, it really was tough. I wanted to move forward, I knew that, but it did take me a few days to just be by myself and battle the negative thoughts that were in my mind and to fill them with God's word. And when I was ready to talk, I went up to Clarissa and we talked about it a little bit and just to see where our marriage was at. And just like in Pensacola, she prayed over me, she prayed over our relationship, and we invited the Holy Spirit into our marriage. And again, that weight that was on me was just lifted off. And it was great. It was amazing to be able to truly move forward. And throughout the days leading up, after the confession, leading up to that point, I was constantly reminded by God that He has forgiven me every day for my sins, for the mistakes that I've made. And so who am I to hold on to something that happened in the past? And yeah, I could tell myself that happened before her relationship with Christ, and that's a good thing. But more importantly, Clarissa was and still is a precious daughter of God. And she is His beloved daughter who is such a blessing to me, our kids, and the people around us. And just like Jesus loved the church, we're called as husbands to do the same. So I'm called to love my wife just like Jesus loved the church. And at this moment of complete vulnerability, I had the opportunity to take a hold of our marriage and make it stronger, stronger than ever, by being able to show mercy, forgiveness, grace, and God's love.
We are firm believers now in the power of being transparent with each other and with your friends and with God. I've seen, as you've heard from my story, how destructive it can be to keep your struggles to yourself and to not reach out for help. When I look back, I used to only feel shame and guilt, but now I see the good that God can do with it. We're raising our children to see that they don't need to be perfect because we serve a God who is.
And we know that our story is exactly what someone needs, to know that they're not alone, that it's not too late, that there's still hope, there's forgiveness, and there's a future far better than we could ever imagine. Jeremiah 29:11 says this, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future."
If you're struggling in any area, give it over to God. Get friends involved that you really trust, that will give you encouragement. Let them share your burden. Let them pray over you. You'll be so glad you do, and you'll be really surprised at the people that really step up in your life and show up when you really need it. And if you don't have a relationship at all with Christ, if you're still on the fence, you're trying to figure out what it is, but you're interested and your heart is open to it, it's as simple as just saying, God, I want you to be a part of my life. I want you to come into my heart. I want a relationship with you. Show yourself to me and teach me what you're all about. And believe me when I say, it will be the best decision you ever make in your whole life.
Amen. I'm Matthew Mangaran.
I'm Clarissa Mangaran. And this is our God story.